welcome everyone. This is talk number 2 for me. Decoupled Drupal, do's and don'ts. So, I'm going to have to give a introduction here. I am not Mike Golding. This is my colleague. He works in Texas and couldn't make it out, so he asked me to fill in for him. So, apologize in advance. I'm not as well versed in this topic as he is, but I do have his slide deck, and I can try to answer the questions as best I can. So, he does say that if you have any detailed questions about this, he is available on Drupal Slack as Mike Golding. So today we are going to talk about decoupled Drupal and the things that we should be doing, the things we should be not doing, and this isn't going to be groundbreaking. Ultimately, it's just a distillation of the experiences that we have found at 4 Kitchens building decoupled sites. We'll start with a do. You should know the goal of the project, because decoupled can be complex. And it's really important to understand if you should be doing decoupled at all, or if you should stay with something like Drupal core, the Drupal core front end. So there are a couple of different questions. There's the enhanced performance that you get out of decoupling. You let Drupal be Drupal and handling the data models and all the site building stuff and making sure that your content editors can do all of their work in a really nice environment. But the front end, if you need that to be heavily performant, decoupled is a good thing to do. You also want to think about flexibility and future-proofing. So with all the different platforms that are out there, for example, mobile apps, IoT devices, you have to think about how your data is going to be viewed in different scenarios. And with decoupled, it makes it a lot easier, because your data is in one place, but your view can take many different forms. Are you looking to go across omnichannel experiences? So, for example, social media or email newsletters or any of that kind of thing. Those kinds of things can be beneficial when you're using decoupled. What about your front-end devs? What are they craving? Maybe the front-end devs really want to play with this new technology and they're really up on it, and they can then run with that development while the other piece of the development for Drupal remains in a separate space. And then static site generators are another thing to think about. Are there areas of your site that don't get updated very often? And again, it goes back to the performance angle. But you need to make sure that if you have those spaces and you want to keep them so that they are fast but also secure, that's another reason to use decoupled. And just remember that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, because you can have a certain project that is decoupled and another project that could be completely just Drupal end-to-end. But don't pick a front end without a plan. There are a lot of front-end solutions out there. It seems like there's a new one every single week. So you have to be careful on which ones you choose and why you choose them. You got to think about things like the capabilities, the feature set. So is it really going after performance? Is it going after dynamic content or static content? You have to think about SEO considerations. And of course, real-time updates. So maybe you have a site that has something that is going to grab data immediately. There are certain frameworks that work much better with that than others. How's the community support? Is there a vibrant and active community who's actually providing updates to the framework? What about a learning curve? Some of these can take a little bit of time to learn. Other ones, really simple. That's their point. So you need to think about the kinds of frameworks and the amount of time and effort and resources that you have to enable them. Long-term viability. So you're thinking about a particular framework, you think about React has been around a long time, but there's a lot of other ones that are up and coming and that You need to choose one that if you know your site's going to be around a long time, that you want to be able to support it, you need a framework that will be there for you. And lastly, hosting capabilities, or compatibility, I should say. You need to make sure that the hosting provider that you are using will support the framework and the feature set that you need. So there are some hosting environments that do have limitations for this kind of thing, and you need to double check on that. And sometimes it's really important to know that the best frameworks are not necessarily the newest or the popular ones. It's the one that's going to fit your project. So it's really important to take the time up front before your project starts to really research. You want to look outside of Drupal. Not for everything. Decoupled Drupal provides a really interesting model of leveraging the specialization of external technologies and external APIs. Well, what does this mean? Well, think about email, SendGrid, MailChimp. You think about search, Agolia or Elasticsearch. These kinds of things where they become a little bit more complex, you don't want Drupal to handle those. You want a third party to handle those. And then you will pull them into your front end. Drupal is very good at, like I said earlier, the site building, the data models, and the ability to give a content editor something easy to use out of the box. And by utilizing these other providers, you're taking that load off of Drupal. You're not having to do any custom development, for example. So Drupal doesn't have to perform absolutely everything. Don't wait to review with stakeholders. This is actually not necessarily just a decoupled thing. This is for basically any project. Is that you want to have regular checkups with your clients, with your stakeholders, and you don't want to wait until the last 10% of the project is done to get that feedback. You need that feedback through the project. But I think it's especially important to note for decoupled projects, because there are so many different moving pieces that you have to make sure that if a client asks for a particular feature and you implement that feature, new features are then going to go on top of that. And it's going to become very difficult to unravel that later in the project. On caching. We all love caching. Not that kind. So, caching is always our trusty sidekick, but it can bite us sometimes. But it is all about speed and efficiency, of course. Fetching data from Drupal sometimes can be relatively quick, but when you're talking about providing that data to a front end, you have to think about where it's being hosted. You have to think about how often that data is being retrieved. Traditional Drupal has the front end, and it has built-in caching layers for that front end. But once you decouple, you now have to think about all sorts of different things. CDNs and browser caches, edge caches, and of course Drupal's own internal caches as well. But they all can work together, and if you plan it out correctly, then you can have a nice performance site. But of course, it's also how you use them. You have to analyze the traffic patterns of where people are loading your site, the various content types that you have, user interactions on the site. If you have a site that is very dynamic and you're pulling data from Drupal, you can't be caching pieces of that, but you can cache other pieces. And don't forget about permissions and access. So Drupal does have a very robust and granular permission set. And if you just use Drupal end to end, all of that permissions and access control, they're built in. But once you decouple a site, you need to decide who's in control. Is it Drupal who's going to be in control of all the permissions, and you're going to be making calls back to ask, does this user have permission to see this thing? Or are you going to let the front end handle the permission set? Each one has its own benefits and drawbacks. And then it all impacts security, user experience, development complexity, and even SEO. And you can't just think about the content either. You have to think about outside of the content. Sitemaps, for example, search results, personalized content, and even menuing and navigation. All of these can be influenced by permissions and access control. So making the wrong decision can lead to security vulnerabilities or a confusing user experience or data that's leaked out that shouldn't have gotten out. So it's really important to address permissions and access control upfront and have a plan going forward for the entire site build. You can also think about assets. Images, videos, documents, all of these digital assets can live in Drupal, and Drupal can manage these. But in a decoupled project, you might want to store those assets in another provider. And that takes, again, we talked about earlier the amount that Drupal can handle and the amount that an external provider can handle. Well, those external providers might provide a lot more speed. They might provide a lot more flexibility. And your front end then can be even leaner and just grabbing the links to the assets from management systems that have CDNs so that when those assets load, they load very quickly for the end user. But you can also manage your assets in Drupal, and that makes it easier for content editors. So there's a give and take. There have been plenty of modules that have been written in order to take advantage of hosting assets outside of Drupal, but managing them in Drupal. But I think at the end, it's that decoupled can be a complex thing to set up. But with careful planning, you can provide an experience that is a much better experience to users on the front end and the back end by building decoupled. There are just a lot of different things to think about. We have a lot of wonderful projects in the Drupal community that are working towards decoupled. I happen to know of a couple that are decoupled starter kits that are on the way that will let you start up a project very quickly. But also there are projects that let you expose data in different ways in the JSON API, for example. So just don't panic and always carry a towel. That's it for me. And I can answer some questions, like I said, but ultimately this talk was from my colleague, so.
Yeah, so what are some of the starter kits coming up? You said you might know something about those?
Yeah, there is, I believe the name of the company is Octodroid. They're working on a starter kit for decoupled. I don't know the technologies, but I know that they're working on one. And then there's another one that's called Decoupled Starter that is a couple of colleagues of mine at Four Kitchens. Yeah.
And then there's Next Drupal by Chapter 3.
That's right.
Which is a whole distribution.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was hoping to ask you, and maybe you know, maybe you don't, I hope you do, but is when I last looked at this, which was 5 years ago, it was a mess. And everyone who did decoupled Drupal, like Acquia said, yeah, we've had this great successful project, and it was with this company, I don't remember who did it, and oh yeah, how many developers did you have? We had 12 developers. Okay, well that's already a big team.
Yes.
Okay, and how many were devoted to the decoupled? Oh, well, it's at least half. So half of them were on decoupled, and half of them were doing basic Drupal kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And when you kept on digging, and you asked more questions, they were rebuilding Drupal.
Yes.
Inside of the decoupled. So my question is, 5 years later, has it gotten any better? Because you say, like you're saying, and I get this isn't your presentation, okay? But you're saying, think it through. Well, think it through and it's already done are two totally different things.
Yes. I think the ecosystem has certainly gotten better. Since I'm more of a back-end guy, I don't play too much with the front end, but I do know that there are always the new hotness on the block.
Right.
And that can be tricky in itself because you say, oh, here's this new way of doing things with that fantastic XKCD comic, right? Where, huh?
People, they have argued that they have decouple and they have their own distribution with the and connect to the common and from the requested one.
Yeah, what was that?
It was 2018 I tested that, and now it's 2024.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, I think it's still tricky because you do have so many different frameworks to choose from, and again, I've done the site builds where it's just Drupal to Drupal, right? And I can trust that I know that that the front end is going to talk to the back end with like no problems. But I also have seen the other side, specifically with the interactivity and the speed that you can get with decoupled sites. But again, it's that research angle.
Well, speed, the actual rendering of the page or the delivery of the page.
Correct.
Not necessarily the development.
No, absolutely.
Right.
Right.
Because now you've got all these people who are on the front end who are rebuilding parts of Drupal that already existed.
Yes.
So when I'm online, there's a fellow, what's his name? Jason So or something like that. He's the one talking about the universal CMS.
Oh.
So what I gather is happening, we're all coming from the monolithic side of Drupal. We're only getting into decouple now and hybrid approaches. Well, the people that started off fully decoupled, they're realizing all the things you just said. So what he keeps on posting on LinkedIn is he said, those guys are coming to the middle, we're coming to the middle.
At some
Everyone's
point, there's going to
realizing
be
this universal CMS where you actually need a bit of everything from both sides. These guys at the beginning were all very proud that they didn't need the back-end people. The Drupal people were all very proud that they didn't need the front-end people, and they're trying to meet in the middle.
Right. I think we're starting to see, for example, with the experience builder that's going to be coming out in Drupal CMS.
Which is going to be built in React.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think that is a great test case for how do you communicate all that data between the layers, ultimately. Because what is React doing in the end, right? It's providing a great user experience. You can drag and drop, and it automatically saves or whatever it's doing. I actually don't know. But I also know that right now, if you want to do any of that kind of stuff in Drupal, you got to have page refreshes, right? Mm-hmm. Things can take a little bit longer, right? So I think that there is definitely a bonus to both. Yeah.
If I may, way back in 2015, we were using Drupal for an intranet, but we had a project where we needed to provide a mobile experience for certain things, and we found this thing called Drupal Gap that was like a phone gap, but with Drupal. And so we built a Drupal gap with using our intranet as a backend, but providing a context switch through a NetScaler for that mobile experience. And what we learned from that was, besides the fact that Tyler Frankenstein is a freaking genius and mad scientist, is that it's why is it considered use specific? Like, we didn't need to decouple all of Drupal to get that experience. We just treated it as like, oh, we have an app, we have a specific application, and that application would benefit from this technology as opposed to trying to put a full-scale Drupal experience behind it. And then, like, now I'm building an asset management system in a big enterprise IT that I'm building. And the primary way users interact with that, most people, are going to be to search for things. So we did our, hooked up our Solar and all that, and then we said, okay, let's just make the search page a single page app. The rest of the Drupal site can just be Drupal. And we'll just serve this one page as a single page app because we need to be able to have quick interactions with facets and like all kinds of other customizations of presentation that really benefited from having that single page experience. But we didn't need to do the whole site that way. And that simplified how we tackled the problem. And this is like one intern and me part-time as a lead in a few months.
Okay, so what comes up for me when you say that is I've been hearing that often the block of having a decoupled site is you can't do drag and drop easily like you can with layout builder, or any of the other options. Not
Right.
actually
So you're talking more about from the editing perspective.
Well, from the editing perspective, so now what you're making me think is, okay, well, maybe you tell the client editing happens in Drupal, the page layout happens in Drupal, pure Drupal, and you just look for the sweet, targeted, focused needs like what you had.
I think it's a really good entryway into it. You figure out what am I trying to accomplish, what is my goal, and what does the client really need to have, what do the users really have that experience, and then you look around to find the tools that will support that. And in some cases, a single page experience will be, or some kind of hybrid single page experience will be just the right thing. But why make that, why choose after that if that's not what you need to solve the problem?
Or you're saying that like the entire site is, you know, done sort of more to the traditional way, but then there's pieces of that site that can be done that are a lot more dynamic, faster, state management, all sorts of fun stuff.
Like if you have a page where you're trying to render reports in a dashboard visually, by all means, use your D3 or whatever the heck people use these days and make that a single page experience, because that is the right tool for that. In fact, you don't even have to serve it from the same like web service. You can have it sitting on another, as a microservice on some other system, and just, you know, use NetScaler Magic or whatever, you know, some other kind of architecture, infrastructure management to give you context and make it look like it's the same site, but it's not. Right? But meanwhile, you have your backend serving to any of these microservices, whatever they need. And you can mix and match the themes. Like if you go on our site and you look at the, you go from your login page and any of the individual nodes back to the search page, back and forth. We just use one of the out of the box Drupal 10 themes, whatever it is these days, Olive something. Olivero, yeah. And we just made for now, we just made our search look the same. And at some point, we'll have to retheme these things with our own theme. So that will be a little bit of lift. But because we structured the page output, the output templates to be similar to what Olivero does naturally, it minimizes how much CSS change we have to apply when we do make that change later. So in some ways, there's some parts of Drupal we were like, yeah, we kind of have to rebuild this sort of, but not completely totally. We can just do some plugins and get most of the same experience, and lean really heavily on REST views and to get us the rest of the way. REST views through Solar views, the REST presentation, and then just build a simple view app and load that app on a template page. So that one, like the search results page, just loading a view app, and it's pretty snappy.
Yeah, we did something similar with, of course, everybody's talking about chatbots, right? So they asked us to build a chatbot. It's actually a lot better done in React.
Yeah.
And so we had some developers come up with the React app, but we still had our Drupal, so we just plopped it in as a block. And then you can hit a little button and it pulls up a modal. It's all in Drupal except for that little piece, and that little piece is a React app that goes off to the chatbot.
Decoupled blocks module is a module that you want to look at for doing that kind of thing, because
Oh, I didn't know that existed. That's great.
Yeah, no clue.
it used to be called progressively decoupled blocks, but now it's called just decoupled blocks.
Decoupled blocks, love it.
My colleague Marc was one of the main developers on it, and so I like to plug it for him. And there's sub-modules that you can install for Vue and React and Angular, all that kind of stuff. So it gives you a way to just drop your, your little decoupled piece, into a block and have it live, wherever you need it to. Kind of like slowly sneak up on the decouple.
Right.
Or if you don't want to go full stop.
And is it still up to you as the developer to make sure that access control is handled, or does the module provide for middle glue?
Provides
Like
visibility,
visibility,
provides
take
access
visibility.
control of blocks. And that Drupal,
Are you talking about within the block itself? Like,
No, I'm just saying with the block, let's start at the highest level, block visibility on the page.
right. I would just utilize Drupal's
So that's probably still
access
Drupal.
control for that.
that's true.
It's still going to live inside of the Drupal template of some sort. Right. So that's identical. Okay, so how deep does it go into the, like how deep can the decoupled logic get back to Drupal for anything else it needs? Like what if there's...
I still think it can
You
be.
still need data to source, and like you can still do GraphQL or JSON API. Or,
Mhm.
Right, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
What's that? Yeah. And every day.
Yes, and very nice. Subsequent request on payroll.
Yeah.
So basically, in big companies, they just see, okay, I have a decoupled Drupal. It's just, I'm making it an API. They just see the source of truth, multiple channels. I can use in my mobile, I can use anywhere. I don't care how Drupal works. I have a team of developers. React developer library, just made up of here.
Mhm.
And then you want to increase the efficiency and all, like reduce the payload time and the JSON payload and all, like return and all. So JSON extra and JSON API and all of that. And I think that is
JSON API extras?
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, like the big companies, okay, they just focus. We want to like optimize our say API with like, it should be very early, it should take less time and how to optimize and all.
Mhm.
And there is team of great developers, they don't care anything. They just want the documentation, how to use the API and authentication and all. That is pretty much.
Wow. Okay. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me in terms of the architecture of
And
that.
that's how they document this is the architect. I don't care what's inside this box.
Exactly. Yeah. You're just providing data ultimately. Yeah. Yeah.
As far as roles and permissions go, you are still using a session. You're sharing a set. You've established a session and then log into Drupal on the front, so you know who they are. You know what the role
It's
is.
a part of the authentication, creating a session and all.
Yeah,
You send a request and what is expected.
yeah. And so whenever you send back the request, you're sending back we know
The
who
node.
the cookie exactly. And so then the view just decides, the rest of you just decides what, based on the permissions you set already, it should send back or shouldn't.
And now,
So-
these days are there like React, Next.js and other CMS, they will take care of all the heavy create the route. You just, you never did a route, you just put in a file folder pattern and it will create routes for you.
Hmm.
So, yes.
Yeah, but now people told
The
me.
government thinks, okay, it's an API, that's all.
Yeah.
That's all I want to do, nothing more, nothing less.
Exactly. But if you start trying to like, but I kind of feel like if we were going to try to take on, say, a generic templating engine, like what Drupal does, which is insane, there's so much work there, or say, I don't know, the admin experience, I would just say no. No, that's going to be like, we'll be working on that 2 years from now.
Right.
Easily.
Decoupling the admin to side.
Yeah, like, it would be insane, right? Exactly, what's the point?
It's okay, whatever it is, it can do the job. I just want to press API module, it will get applied.
Yeah, it's all on deciding like what is the least that the end user needs to have for this experience. Or it's like, yeah, I'm gonna bring up a rocket launcher to shoot a fly.
And the funny thing that happens, we have a big slide, it's really very good, it's on Drupal 809, and then it says, oh, I want to completely use React for the front end, I don't need any of it. So I said, okay, now the views can make things so faster and easy. And how much time will React developer will have to put to do the same thing?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's sort of back to the point that was made earlier, which is how much time and effort do you have to put towards a project like this? Like in recreating the wheel ultimately, but there's a reason behind it. And some people, they don't have that kind of time and effort, and they're fine with how Drupal just has the front end with the templating engine and it's all ready to go. It's got caching and everything. But if you want just that little bit more, or even a lot more in terms of interactivity or faster load times, or if you want to host it on a totally different platform, that's where this stuff can be really
Or if you want
beneficial.
access to a lot more front-end developers.
Exactly.
Not a whole bunch of those in Drupal.
That's
Yeah.
true.
And then React developers, okay, we can hire them easily and they're getting done. Like some big companies have a problem like this. And there's like a preference to,
Yeah.
like prejudice, like nobody wants something as a service. You don't have to do anything inside about
And also the migration, like, the people, major version of things, like, when fixing the whiteboards, and we think about decoupling, using some people versus using people as a plan.
That's an interesting point too. I never really thought about that. Yeah.
Most of your front end behavior is built into the decoupled app, then when you upgrade there's probably less modules you have to worry about.
Yeah, the back end is usually behind the firewall, so.
And then Drupal almost just becomes a more about a database that has easily customizable database with roles and permissions. And that's really what that is.
It's contentful, it's been around for a while.
Yes. But see, this is where the stuff I'm really hoping, maybe tomorrow Birds of Feather, like, people will talk about is how do you, and now that you move into this more of a microservice, Drupal is part of a microservice environment, ecosystem, how do you leverage that? Like, how far can you push a backend with different front-end applications, kits per whatever? What do those strategies look like? What design decisions do you make for these kind of front-end lightweight apps that will make them more modular as you have projects that are similar and you need to carry them forward, redo all your work all over again?
Mm-hmm.
How do you make them resistant to change, to upgrade change? That's the stuff I don't know yet. I don't know how to answer those questions. I'm hoping someone else has some experience and can talk about it.
Right. Yeah, it's always been a fascination of me with Decoupled that there's always the talk about the front end, but there's not a whole lot of talk about where the data comes from, or how do you edit that data in a pleasant way, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so that's why I mean, it's one of the reasons why I really like working in Drupal is because out of the box, there are a lot of pleasant ways of editing content. And then it comes with the access controls and all that stuff. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. But then on the front end, that's where you're like, well, I've got some cool new things that I want to do, right?
You're bleeding edge on the front end.
Exactly.
Optimize the back end. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, I have another question. So I'm only now starting to play with some React components, and the experience is horrible. The code is garbage looking. From someone coming new, I'm not a new programmer. It takes a while to get your head over all the things that are going on. Is it really that much of an advantage that you have access to all these React front-end developers as opposed to this admittedly scarce front-end full people? Because it looks to me like you need pretty damn advanced programmers with those components. Am I wrong?
Not if you get good ones.
Not what?
Not if you get good ones.
I think it's a specialty thing.
Somebody who really loves JSX or something weird.
Right.
Exactly, right? You get somebody who, yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. So,
There was a great presentation from Marc when they were talking about like stupid knowledge versus useful knowledge, and like in Drupal there's a bit of stupid knowledge, right? Things that you have to
that was you. Okay.
So right, yeah. So the same is true with React, but once you sort of get over that, like if you get good developers, which is easier to do, then yeah, you can have them producing good quality coding. I mean,
It was several years ago. I remember I was looking for a job and I said, I'm a Drupal developer, and somebody kind of looked at me funny and they said, you really ought to learn React, because they said there's no jobs in Drupal.
Yeah.
And it's like, I get it, right? Because there are a lot of, not just React, right, but like the front end tooling, right, that's very hot right now. And of course it is. There's so many cool things you can do with it, but it's pretty specific, right? Each language has its own way of doing things. So.
But it's also overused, like people just they just trend, people are doing that, so when they decide, okay, And the other use case is not, he decides and the complete. So it's just not it's the best thing to do, but it's a good.
Right.
There are options out there. React is what the Drupal community at large seems to have gone to. But like we chose Vue. We chose Vue after looking at a few of the options out there. And,
If you come from a Drupal background, you might actually like working with Vue a little bit better.
Oh, I get it.
yeah, it's
There's some things like Skull,
it's more forgiving.
you can get like cool front-end stuff that's a little bit easier to do.
The point is, there are options out there, and in this case, this is part of the decision was driven by the fact that the really brilliant intern that I had access to was more comfortable with you. And he's like, yeah, I think this is the way we should go. And I said, fine, let's do it. So we got it. We got it. So. Hopefully, it pans out tomorrow.
Right.